Hello, mate. I don't know what's happening
This
with my.
meeting is being recorded.
I don't know what's happening with my light. Um, give me one sec.
No worries.
I might. Oh, now I'm frozen. Now I might jump out and then jump back in again. Is that right?
Go ahead, man. Go ahead.
Okay. Sweet. Okay. There we go.
Looking good, mate. Okay, I'm gonna make you host now.
Okay.
There you go. Now you can just let those people in now, yeah? In the weight room. You know how to do that? Participants down the
No, I
bottom.
no, I do not.
Okay, give me back host and I'll get them all in.
Well, just tell me. Oh, so there's participants.
Yeah.
I click on that, and then do I just go
Admit.
admit all?
Yeah.
Okay. You'll have to show me how to do this because I tried to do a webinar once and it was a dumpster fire.
Oh, serious.
Oh, well, the start of it was anyway, right? Because my mate showed me how to do it in like 5 minutes before we
Right.
went and this. And then what I did recall or remember of it, it was gone, right?
Oh, get you. Nah, it's easy enough once you get the hang of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And for everybody joining, we're just shooting the shit till we get everything going. So chill your beans. We're gonna get going in just a wee minute when we get everybody in and all the rest, you know?
Oh,
Another
I
thing I
like.
want is just guys, get your cameras on because it's lovely to see faces instead of just fucking words. Isn't that, Sean?
Unless, of course, you're aggressively masturbating, then I'd rather keep your camera. Like if knock yourself
Okay.
out, knock yourself out, but I don't want to be able to see it.
How's it going, good run?
Hello, hello.
So what time you got? 5 past. I think
Yeah.
we actually got up to the 48 out of the 50 registrants the last time I looked, so there could be a couple more.
Okay, great.
So we'll give it another. What do you think? Another 60 seconds. Go at 7 past 8, Sean.
Mate, I'm easy. I've got nothing else to do this morning, so.
Oh, deadly! Look at you. Are you having a wee coffee there, man?
My first sip of the morning, mate. First sip of the morning.
For anybody that doesn't know, Sean's getting up at like 5 a.m. for us guys just to host this.
Well, I'll have it's 5 a.m. now. I got up at 4. So. But that's why, look, as a PT, I've always, excuse me, I've always started life. It starts early for me. My day starts early, so like, I see myself getting up at 5, and then say I train at 6 o'clock in the morning more often now. And for me, that's like a late start, right? Because I used to get up at 4, walk down to the gym that I worked at, which isn't too far away from where I still live. And I'd be in the gym. I'd be the first person in the gym at 5 o'clock. So, and last person out at 8:30 of an evening. Well, last trainer out at least, anyway.
And then, do you know what happens then? That's your body clock just set for life, isn't it? There's nothing you can do about that.
Yeah, well, I like it, right? I find that like if I sleep in, albeit till 7 a.m., I've wasted the start of my day, right? I'm in a deficit. And so yeah, but then I'm fucked by the end of the day. Like come 8 o'clock, like shit. Come if I try to work and try to do anything which requires any degree of cognitive sort of ability after like 5 p.m., I'm useless.
I mean, I'm the same. Like my youngest daughter is like what is she, 9? And there's times I'm in bed before she is, and she would go to bed at like 9:30, 9:45. Like I'm such a fucking rock star.
Oh, good times.
Now, before we begin, one thing I want to say is like I've had so many messages, Sean, about like
Yes.
people know the tickets are getting quite low. So before I forget, look, I'm gonna stick the link to the
yes.
seminar up here now. Look, it's in the group chat because there was quite a few saying they wanted to get tickets before this webinar happened because they knew they were gonna. So look, guys, the link is in the chat box, so we don't have to wait any longer for everybody. It was because there was about 7 or 8 messages I got earlier, and I was like, I can't fucking answer this. I'm trying to get this going. So there it is for everyone asking.
Happy days. All right,
okay.
Shall we begin?
Okay. That's it. Take it away, man.
We begin. All right. Well, thank you, Sean. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for attending. This is definitely, it's only the second webinar I've ever done, and definitely the most organized of both this one and the previous. So I'm hoping it runs smoothly. What I'll do is I'll cover the 3 points that were outlined, I suppose, in the link in what you guys were admit. So I'm getting new people coming up, admitting them in. Latecomers, how dare they? Yeah, so the 3 key points, and then I'll open up some Q&As, all right, guys? So what I'll get you guys to do, feel free if and when you want to, if a question pops up in your head, pop it up into the chat, and I'll dive into it and discuss it once I get through my my spiel. So if you don't already have a pen and pad, sort yourself out and get one. No, but if you can, write something down or at least think really hard so you can remember what I'm going to say. Because, and this I suppose is a reflection, is a condensed experience to a degree of the seminar, right, coming up in a few weeks. In the sense that you get a taste of my coaching, you get a taste of some of the topics, you get a taste of the insight as to what will be spoken about, what we dive into, but also the nature in which the learning process, if your internet connection will, I don't need distraction, Sean. I'm going to close that. Yeah, so anytime I've done, attended any sort of seminar or workshop or whatnot, there's typically, as with my seminar, there's a lot of information that you consume within a relatively condensed period of time. And memory is predictably pretty shit, right? And so rather than just trying to remember a whole bunch of good points from the day of the seminar or even now, it's best to write them down, right? Even if they're in dot form, because in like bullet point type dot form, you're far more likely to remember a lot more than just the dot because it's the trigger, right? So why I'm saying that now, because I'd like you to, when I'm going through what I'm about to go through, sort of just dot some points down as a means to refer back to. Oh, okay, he was talking about this. Like, you're never going to remember everything, right? It is what it is. I've done the same courses in person or online with different people and different things over time on more than one occasion, because especially with what we do in the industry, it's very practically learned, right? It's not a matter of just you absorb a YouTube video and all the information on that video is now in your head and you can use it. No, it's like, no, it's a practically applied skill. So we want to expose ourselves, to new information, new ways of thinking, all that sort of good stuff. And then we need to apply it in order to understand how it actually works, or if it does, or if it applies to you or the cohort of people that you work with. And so we have to accept that, all right, I need to absorb a whole bunch of information. I'm only going to retain so much at a period of time, and then go over it again and go over it again, right? So our talking points for today. Number 1, will be refining your coaching communication skills. Number 2, so that's refining your coaching communication skills. Number 2, excuse me, is understanding programming decision-making. Understanding programming decision-making. And the last one, master exercise technique cueing and coaching. Master exercise technique cueing and coaching. Now, I try to make those sound as exciting and as like fancy as possible. It's basically me just talking shit, trying to help you out, right? That's all it is. That's all it is. So under each of those topics, one sec. I'm just going to, if you guys can mute yourselves, that would be great. So I don't get, thank you very much. Okay. And one sec. Recording stopped. We don't want that. How did that happen? I wasn't even touching the screen.
Don't know why that did that, Sean. Record's down the bottom if you want to hit it again.
Is that in? Yes, it is.
This meeting is being recorded.
How bizarre. I was literally, I'm not even touching it, I swear. I'm not even for a bloke who works online for a living, I'm pretty retarded. So refining your coaching communication skills. Just note these points down as I say them, and then I'll expand on them. All right. So reduce the distance. I'll do it one by one. I'll make the point and then I'll expand on it. Reduce the distance between explanation and application. Right. So reduce the distance between explanation and application. Now, if there's one thing that I've learned over the years of coaching people face to face, it's that it's not so much what you say or even how you say it, it's how it lands, right? It's how it lands. The words we use, how we express those words, and ultimately how someone received those words is what will determine whether or not the information that we're trying to bestow upon that person or a group of people actually is absorbed, how easily it's absorbed, and thus how well it can then, bloody latecomers, and then how well that can be applied. There's no value. There's noises going on here. Sean, I don't know what's going on. Chimes going off, people getting in late. Like, oh, I'm so easily frazzled. Now, there's no value adding complication, fancy words or jargon if the person on the other end, one, doesn't give a shit, and more often than not, they don't. They just want the results. They want the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, right? So we need to sell them into the rainbow. We need to sell them into the process, but it needs to be one that is palatable, that is easily digestible, and something that they are going to be able to feel just as confident or apply when you're not there, right? So one of the key examples I use in the seminar when explaining something like this is referencing dorsiflexion, right? Dorsiflexion. So dorsiflexion is when the knee goes over the toe when our feet are flat on the ground, right? So you're cueing someone to drive their knee over their toe, dorsiflex. You never cue them to dorsiflex your ankle more, right? That's fucking retarded, right? Because like that, you're asking someone to remember what dorsiflexion means. The whole time, like, it's so unnecessary. You just cue them to drive their knee over their toe and keep their heel down, right? As simple as that. Yes, there's more words involved, but you've simplified the communication and the ability for that person to then understand, oh, okay, cool. Also, the nature in which you're expressing that to them, it reduces, the explanation isn't just used in more simple terms and simple words, but what you're doing is you're breaking down barriers between you and them and the way in which they need to then become confident to apply that shit by themselves. Even if they understand what dorsiflexion means, it's a word that, unless you're talking about movement in sort of a personal trainer space or a physiotherapist or something like this, no one uses that word, right? No one uses terms like that. So let's not use it. Let's just use language and words that people understand and talk using every single day, right? You get no extra points for using complicated language, right? So we want to reduce the distance between explanation and application, because ultimately it's not about what we know. This is a nice little point you might want to write down. It's not about what we know. It's about how well someone else can apply that knowledge, right? It's not about what we know. It's about how well someone else can apply that knowledge. Because we might know, and when discussing with, colleagues, we might know the ins and outs of what we have to do, the value behind adding in more detail. But ultimately, again, it's about how well someone else can apply that knowledge and how quickly we can get them to a level of confidence that is akin, that is akin to when you are standing over them when they're doing whatever it is they're doing, right? Because most of the sessions that we have, and I'll reframe that, our exposure to the clients or the people that we're working with is going to be very limited for face-to-face versus what is for when they're spending time by themselves. And ultimately, we want to empower people to be as self-sufficient as possible, right? And the only way in which to do that is to think about, how can I communicate with this person in a way that leaves them just as confident to be able to apply themselves, whether I'm standing here or not, right? And so by unintentionally gatekeeping that confidence by using words which only if this person is only ever exposed to words using just dorsiflexion as simple as one example, if they're only exposed to words in the cocoon that is, you and them in your session, then, and they never hear these words outside of that, the likelihood that they're going to feel confident to then apply and remember and think about those outside of that is slim to none, right? Think about simple shit that people can remember. I mean, oh, cool, I'm just going to drive my knee over my toe. Happy days, right? Keep it simple. Now, that's not to say you need to dumb things down for people. Some people absolutely froth on things which are more educationally based, right? So on a case-by-case basis, you want to judge it and scale it. And certainly if someone seems that they're super keen on these things, yeah, dive into a little bit more detail. But detail doesn't mean complication, right? Added detail doesn't mean added complication, right? That's an important note to make. And that's sort of one of those key consistent theme throughout the day of my seminar is that I will add a lot of detail as to what we're doing and how to break things down and how to look at things and whatnot, and individual considerations when it comes to sort of program design, which is sort of the next point along here. But those additional considerations and added detail is not to be confused or conflated with complication, right? I certainly used to be that way because, you think that, oh, someone's got to a certain point, you need to add more detail, and that detail becomes more complicated, more smoke and mirrors. It's not. It just creates more issues. All right, so next point on that, under refining your coaching communication skills, is minimal effective dose. Minimal effective dose, right? Because ultimately, what we're wanting to do is identify where someone is at the moment. If someone's brand new to training, then we need to appreciate that as such, and then just get them a little bit better, right? So if you're meeting someone, they're on the ground floor of what will be their journey, right? And we want to get them to the penthouse, right? And build more levels on top, right? Well, we only need to get them from the ground floor to level 1, and then from level 1 to level 2, and so on, right? Now, there's no point giving them information to move them from the ground floor to level 10, right, in one go, right? That's the direction in which we're traveling upwards, and it's going to be, the same information at some stage, but they haven't earned the right to get there, right? They haven't earned the right to be exposed to that information, sorry, not just yet. So you need to find where they are, identify what this person's level of experience is, and ultimately, and see how they move, see how they respond to basic cueing, and gather information. So just standard sort of consultation type, information gathering. And then from there, we just want to bump up, make them a little bit better, than they were yesterday, the day before, right? And see how they respond to cueing, see how they respond to the coaching. And because ultimately that is what we do, right? It is a matter of trial and error. Trial and error. That's always the way, because we can have a method, we can have a structure, we can be confident in the way in which we sort of approach everyone generally, but we don't know for sure how anyone is going to respond to anything that we apply until it's applied, right? And so we always have to take that with a grain of salt, right? So minimal effective dose, simply just referring to what is the least amount of information that I can provide this person to improve from where they are now, improve their position, and take them from where they are now to just a little bit better, right? And you may go up a number of those sort of like metaphorical levels in one session, right? Depending upon where they started and how well they respond, right? And how good you are at what you do, right? But ultimately, it's going to be dependent upon them, right? And so it's important not to force something that isn't there. Yeah. So that's a minimal effective dose. Next point is one that I've already made, is just detail over complication, right? So this is basically me in the seminar. I will start waffling on under a particular topic, and then I have a run sheet, which is on my laptop that I'll refer back to, because I want it to be as flowy as possible, right? Now, the same way I'm communicating with you guys is the same sort of way, and this is why the sort of seminar is open to both coaches and non-coaches alike, right? Because ultimately, this same information is just as applicable to people who are not coaches, right? Obviously, the talk today is a little bit more specifically aligned to coaches, and I've structured it in such a way. But when it comes to educating your clients, I'd expect you to talk in the same sort of way. So ultimately, we want to get our clients as confident and as independent as possible, as quickly as that can be, right? Doesn't mean they're going to leave you. It just means that they're going to be as confident to apply what you want them to, what they want to do to achieve the results that you're trying to help them with, whether you're there or not, right? And ultimately, what I've found, and I'm sure a lot of you guys that have been training people for any length of time can attest to, is that ironically, the more you provide value to people, it's not like they leave because they've got value from you, now they fuck off. No, they see the continued value and the effort that you're putting in to provide value, and they stick around because of it. If they don't know how much value you can potentially continue to provide, and you just sort of like hold your cards close to your chest, so to speak, and as soon as they feel like, oh, okay, that's all there is to know about this, that's all there is to know about that, they'll fuck off, right? Whereas if you provide them continued value and level up what they thought they already knew everything about when it came to squatting or deadlifting, all I've got to do is not hurt myself and I'll be good. It's like, oh, that's the basement level standard when it comes to a particular movement. We need to go to the ground floor and then level one and so on, right? And so, but people don't know that. People don't know what they don't know. And so it's on us to then help them understand that, right? And so that's sort of the value of, again, communication, understanding what it is that we're trying to communicate to them, and not just trying to communicate better positioning and an understanding of how to train, where with the extension of that, we're expressing our value, our continued value to them, so they can, so we stick around basically, right? Because at the end of the day, we're trying to run a business. Now, and lastly on that sort of first topic being refining your coaching communication skills, and there's overlapping of all these guys. I just try to sort of try to group them the best I could. Quality, quantity, and intensity. All right, so write those down. Quality, quantity, and intensity. I'm going to have some caffeine. That's outstanding at 5:30 in the morning. Oh. I hadn't spoken 2 words before I jumped on here today. And I actually might have woke my missus up. Wake up. That's 2 words I spoke. So quality, quantity, and intensity. So what that those are sort of the boiled down directives that I will get my clients to focus on, right? Quality, quantity, and intensity, because that essentially is the recipe for results, right? The recipe for results within a training session that I want someone to focus on, right? Because it's important when we are providing detail to someone, and albeit not complicated detail, it's important to then ensure that the instructions within that detail are as boiled down as possible. So what I mean by that is if we're providing feedback on a particular exercise or whatever we might be doing, sharing some insight on something, I like to provide as much of a broad overview of where my I'll reframe that. We need to give people instructions as to what to do, right, or what not to do. But ultimately, if we just tell them, do this, don't do that, it has them thinking that that's all they need to think about. Well, that is all you need to think about, but that's not all you need to know. That's not all you should know, right? So provide them with more information, more sort of a broader view in respect to, maybe let's use a squat as an example, right? Explaining the interplay of ankle mobility with hip mobility and thoracic mobility, and the way in which they, in synchronicity, will influence the overall body position and the success that someone will have in that exercise, right? Explain that to them so they become better educated and understand the value of everything working in concert with one another. But that doesn't really give them direction so much. Like, that's information, which is valuable, which is great, but it doesn't really give them that much direction. So it's important to understand giving them information like that is definitely valid and encouraged. But what are the points that they need to focus on within that greater cohort of information, right? So you want to have some direct instructions there within that information, right? So depending upon the individual in that example, we might be saying just so they can focus on what they need to focus on, right? Especially from a takeaway standpoint, because you can control the session, right? Which might be an hour, maybe 2 hours, or the 4 or 5 hours that they spend in the gym in the week, right? And then maybe additional time they do some mobility at home, right? So it's important that we give them enough information so they know what they need to value, they have a broader overview, and then they have those direct points, right? So I went a bit off topic on that one, but why I mentioned that was when it comes to focused directives within training in general, aligned with that, but more generally speaking, is quality, quantity, and intensity, right? And so those directives being focusing on making sure people are moving well enough, so the quality by which they're performing the movement is of a good enough standard based on where they are, based on what they've developed, and always looking to improve upon that. And then there's the quantity of what they're doing. So they're doing adequate amount of work based on what's being prescribed, right? And relative to their goals, right? And lastly, intensity, right? Make sure that the quality in which they're moving and the quantity of that quality movement is pushed hard enough to the point of failure, or at least, within a few reps, right? Because there's no point having something which is, so from a technique standpoint, there's no value to performing a movement well, looks good, and you do enough of it, you do the 12 reps you were prescribed or something, but if your distance from where that set finishes at that 12, as an example, and where you could have done 20, well, the intensity is dog shit, right? So we need a marrying up of those three values, quality, quantity, and intensity, for the recipe that is the results to be achieved, right? And so as much as we provide detail, whether it be, the squatting example, like I said, or because obviously ultimately there's going to be a lot more information than we provide in just one exercise, right? We're providing a lot of information to people, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, the likelihood that someone's going to remember even half of what we say is slim to none, right? And they're going to remember it accurately anyway, right? And so we need to understand that first and foremost when it comes to communicating with someone and try to educate people. is that you want to bestow them with as much information that you deem is necessary. And then, lose Sean, maybe. Bestow them with as much information as necessary. And you're right there. That's it. Who knows? You want to provide people with as much information as you feel is necessary, but then give them simple directives, right? So simple directives, as I mentioned, in regards to the more specific technical cues and feedbacks of a given exercise. Also, more generally speaking, what does this person need to know, or what do I need to know as that person performing the movements in the gym? What do I need to know? What do I need to think about? What is the lowest barrier to entry from a focus standpoint to get the results we want to? So it's quality, quantity, and intensity. If a client is simply guided by that, they are going to do very well, right? They've got to move as well as they can. They've got to do enough, and that's down to us prescribing that. And we've got to make sure it's hard enough. We've got to teach people how to train hard, what difficulty means, right? And that's what I'm saying. I cover it in more detail in the seminar. Now, I'm going to put my jumper off because I'm schwitzing in here. Oh. Body gets hot when I talk so much shit. Oh. Oh. Oh, okay. I love how light it is there, by the way. I can see the background in so many people's videos. Like, that's what I'm most excited about. I'm off to Paris next Saturday. And I check the sunset time, 5 to 10. I cannot wait. I know Dublin will be much the same, right? I love how light it is outside. It's fucking, like, it's here at the moment. I'm sure it's even worse for you guys in your winter time. I wouldn't dare come to Ireland in winter time. You couldn't pay me enough money. Yeah, it's like dark at 5 o'clock, and I'm so precious, right? It's just like, oh my God, it's 12 degrees. Mate, we're for a country built out of convicts, we're very piss weak over here when it comes to that. I'll tell you. All right. So next point, next sort of big point: understanding programming, decision making. Hi, kids. Oh, I just see him in the background. Understanding programming, decision making. Okay, so under that point, you need to get to know the person, not just the goals, right? You need to get to know the person, not just the goals. To simply frame this, if we look at the difference between, if you were putting a program together simply based on a set of goals, right? Someone wants to get bigger or stronger or fitter or leaner or something, right? You know, this is the person. You've got a bunch of, questions. You've got like an onboarding questionnaire or something that someone's filled out, but you haven't actually had a conversation with the person. You haven't met the person, right? You haven't had any sort of, genuine connection with that person to sort of get a feel for the person answering those questions. Then you're just writing a fucking program which has limited specificity. I wouldn't say it has no specificity, it has limited specificity, right? Because ultimately there are so many more individual considerations that need to be taken into account when it comes to a program, right? If we want it to be as well suited as possible, right? Now, when it comes to sticking to any plan, whether it be a training plan, nutrition plan, a business plan, financial plan, adherence is the number one thing to think about, right? Because the plan ain't worth shit if someone doesn't stick to it long enough to see it through, right? There's no point putting a financial plan together and on paper I'm saving, $1,000 a week or something like that. It's like, yeah, but you're living off $50, right? And it's like it doesn't make sense, right? It's got to be something which is an appropriate balance between what is achievable and what is getting you in the right direction, right? And depending upon a person, someone can adhere to things of greater demand, some people less so. And the only way in which to get to know that is to have a conversation, get to know a person, right? And so this has been made so much more apparent to me, where I have to be more intentional to do so, and I connect with people with piece of piss. But when I've been working with people online, is to ensure that even if I'm inquiring about coaching or working with me, and they're like, sweet, sign up, good to go, which is rare, but I certainly enjoy it. It makes business good, but I don't have to try to sell them, right? But it'll be a Zoom like this, right? And I get to just shoot the shit and get to know a person, right? Because from there, you get an insight as to the person who is going to give you the details of an onboarding questionnaire, which is, what their goals are, right? They're going to share their goals over a video as well. Because ultimately, people have a really poor perception of reality, right? In terms of what it is they can achieve in a given period of time, what's realistic, right? And so people will often say, I want to lose, X amount of kilos, and I want to get stronger, and I want to look like this. I want to be able to do that. It's like, well, these things can be achieved, but like you've got limited, if any, real training experience. You've got some gym anxiety, you've got this, that, and the other, right? And so there's a number of confounding variables there alone. You've got like bad ankle or something, you've got shit mobility, and it's like, it's only, you've got whatever might be, considerations that add to your decision making, right? So ultimately getting to know a person is, I'm so easily distracted. Like a golden retriever. Getting to know a person is so fundamentally important to understand whether or not you're making the right decision for them, right? Because for example, this is probably a good example, right? When I was younger, I wanted to be a professional rugby league player, right? Evidently, didn't make it, right? Sore point. No, but through my adolescence, through my teenage years, I trained at the gym. I started training in the gym when I was like 12, 13 years old, right? And so I would train akin to a bodybuilder, right? I did a bro split for a ridiculous amount of years. Monday chest, Tuesday back, Wednesday legs, Thursday shoulders, Friday arms, and I played footy on the weekend, and I trained during the week, right? And so like I got good results, right? But I got results in spite of the inefficiencies of my decision making, of my programming, right? And so that's ultimately one. And like if my programming was more aligned with my, ultimately what I cared about, which was my football, I might have actually made something about myself, right? But here we are. But ultimately, we're not going to see the inefficiencies of poor decision making. We just don't achieve results, right? Results just aren't achieved, right? So the same. So what I mean by that is it takes time to achieve a result, right? So if someone wants to get bigger or stronger or leaner or fitter, it takes a period of time. It takes an accumulation of work being put in over a period of time in order to end up with some sort of result, right? Now, if you achieve a result, as I did when I was younger, you don't really tend to question the efficacy of the methods because it got a result, right? You don't realize you could have gotten maybe a lot further in that same time period. You just don't get there, right? And so when it comes to poorer decisions aligned with that idea, poorer decisions aren't going to be found out until months down the track, maybe years down the track, for instance. And so many people will spend months and years at the gym and they kind of just float around and they don't get anywhere, right? And it's like, well, they're still putting in work, putting in time, putting in effort, and they kind of dribble out results, right? But that's about it, right? And it's like, well, where's that missing link, right? And there's a number of factors, but one of the key factors is their programming, right? The programming specificity isn't aligned with their objectives, right? And it doesn't mean that they're performing the movements poorly. It just means that for the allotment of time that person has throughout the week, the decisions made around what exercises and the progressions of those exercises and all that sort of stuff weren't good decisions, right? And so what I like to say, feel free to write this down, you don't have to be hurting yourself for your technique to hurt your progress, right? You don't have to hurt your technique to hurt your progress. Because you can be performing a movement well, like case in point, if someone's performing someone wants to get like fucking swole, right? Someone wants to get a big set of wheels. Now, there's nothing wrong with squatting. I love squatting. That's no fucking secret. But if someone doesn't have the skill set or the experience when it comes to barbell squatting, and no real interest to squat as well, right? They just want to get bigger legs. And they have full access to, you know, a commercial style gym, hack squat, leg press, leg extension, all that sort of stuff. Getting someone to squat is not a bad idea, but ultimately it's not something that should be prioritized, because the stimulus to fatigue ratio in something like a squat is quite high, right? So for every repetition of a squat you perform, it's very stimulating, yes, but the fatigue accumulated is also massive. So the total volume you can achieve within a given time period is going to be limited. And ultimately, volume is a key contributor for growing muscle, right? And so if you want to grow muscle, someone's goals are, I want to get a massive set of wheels. All right, cool. Well, do you like to squat? No, I never have. I've got poor mobility, blah, blah, blah. All right, cool. Well, here's a program, and the first exercise on the day is squats. It's fucking dumb, right? And then the person might do it because they're disciplined and will listen to you. But ultimately, if you put them on something like a hack squat, and you put them on a leg press, you put them on even some sort of lunge as an example, as an alternative, sorry, you're still going to hammer those same muscles, allow yourself to get a lot more volume in, have the volume be a lot more easily recoverable within a short time period, do another set, and the total volume you get in within a training session is going to be far greater. See where I'm going at with this, right? So it's a matter of understanding, as well as what to do, understanding the implications of what not to do and the poor decisions that can be made. And ultimately, no one's going to be there with a red flag going, hey, that's the wrong decision. You just won't achieve the results down the line, right? And so that's not to say that, you know, not to put the fear of God into you when it comes to decision making around programming and being like, oh, is this the right decision? Ultimately, we don't know whether the decision is going to be as good as it can be until we apply it, right? But the point I'm sort of trying to make, and sort of the emphasis there, is to be as critically aware of your decisions as possible. Put your thinking cap on and look objectively at the decision and be like, does this feel like the best or a really good decision based on the time allotment for this person, right? You know, so someone might train 3, 4, 5 sessions a week, say they're an hour, give or take, right? Well, within that, you can only fit so many exercises, right? There's only so much volume you can do in those, so much effective volume you can do in those sessions. All right, cool. Well, it's really important to understand and sort of draw back from that, right? Someone will ask, well, how many days a week should I squat? How many days a week should I do this? Whatever. It's like, well, how many days a week can you afford to train, right? Because it's a matter of what someone can afford to do on a consistent basis and adhere to, and then kind of work backwards from there, aligned with their goals. Because we want someone to be able to train hard. We want someone to be able to train frequently relative to their availability. And ultimately, we need someone to be able to recover from that work, right? And so your recoverability will be the key factor to determine whether or not the program is working and it's sort of as aligned with someone's goals as possible, and ultimately delivering results. But we're not going to know that until we apply it, right? So there's always a degree of fluidity that we need to have when it comes to programming, and not anyone that is too absolute in almost anything that we do, because everything is so individually determined by someone's by how someone is going to respond to a particular protocol. Anyone that speaks in absolutes, like this program is the best, or this method is like the best, or whatever. It's like, no, that's just something that you like. So the best doesn't exist, right? The best program doesn't exist. The best set of exercises don't exist. It's like you can have your favorite and ones that you have found to be very effective, but that doesn't make them the best, right? Because ultimately, what makes them on the best on an individual basis to that person is that they really bought into it, right? If that would be like me saying squatting is the best leg exercise, well, out of context, that's an invalid point to make, right? It's an incomplete point, right? Because it's not the best leg exercise because it's a leg exercise. It's my favorite leg exercise, and it's something that I adhere to doing the most, even when I can't be fucked to train, right? So for me, it makes it the best. But those are additional considerations that make it the best for me, right? It may, for that very reason, it may be a very poor choice for other people, right? So it's important to understand the individual when it comes to that. So that's sort of all stemming from you need to get to know the person, not just the goals, right? And what I find really helpful, because ultimately we're putting programming together for an individual, right? And where are we getting our information from, about how we put a program together is from that person. It's from that person. So it only makes sense to open a line of communication with that person and express to them and let them know that, all right, I'm going to put something together based on an initial conversation, based on an onboarding questionnaire, so a set of questions that'll get you, you can have your time to answer. And then from there, I'll put a program together. And what I'll do from there is I want you to be as honest with me with the exercises that you like, don't like, more so on the ones you haven't tried. If someone says, I don't like this exercise, if it's only a Bulgarian split squat, I hear that from everyone, so they're going to get it anyway. But it's more just like if something feels a bit odd, or like, they might have a dodgy hip and like, oh, they don't want to do this, and because they can't perform it well enough. They're like, cool, that's fine. But if you give them, a cachet of exercises that they are, unfamiliar with, and then it's a matter of, all right, we'll see how you go. The barrier might be too high for them at a given point in time. And cool, well, we can swap that out for something else which is a little less intimidating, which more or less, or at least someone can feel more confident in straight away. And then they can hit those same muscles, that same movement pattern, more effectively quicker, right? And then build up over time. But it's important to let that person know that the programming put together is for them. And ultimately, what I say to clients is like, I'm not married to this program. Like, I wouldn't say I don't give a shit about it. I do, but I only give a shit about it as far as it is effective for you and your results. So it does have the ability to be tweaked and massaged to get it to where it needs to be. And ultimately, say from the next sort of phase, the more that we work together, the more information you gather on a person, what they like, what they dislike, what they adhere to more, what they push themselves in a little bit more. They really prefer a lunge than a split squat. It pretty much loads the body in very much the same way. But if they really hate one exercise, and then like Bulgarian split squats is a good example. I hate Bulgarian split squats, but I love reverse lunges. All right, cool. Well, we'll do a reverse lunge from a deficit, bit more hingy. You get in the glute into a similar sort of position. All right, happy days. That person's going to adhere to the lunge a lot more, and thus they're going to be more enthusiastic to do it, whether you're there or not, right? So it's gathering these little data points, these little nuggets of information based on a person's experience, and then you can make better decisions for them. Those better decisions aren't more complicated. You're just being more considerate of information that comes through. Because a former version of myself, and you're younger trainer, you don't necessarily think through this lens. You just think, all right, cool, this is a good program, this is how to put the program together, they have to do it. It's like, yeah, but ultimately there's so many ways in which you can put a strength program together, hypertrophy program together, fat loss, conditioning, right? Ultimately, it's whether or not they do it, and they do it well, they do it effectively, they do it for long enough, right? And so that's what determines whether an exercise or a program rather is sort of better or worse suited to an individual. Not the best, or this program's better than that program, because you can put two people who have very similar experiences, very similar goals, very similar demographics, right? Within a very similar demographic, and give them the same sort of program or the same program, right? And because it makes sense to do so, and they can have two very different results, right? Not necessarily end result in regards to, well, they may do because everyone's genetically different, but two different results in regards to their adherence to it. for whatever reason. The program vibes with them and someone else it doesn't, right? And that doesn't mean the program is good or shit. It just means on an individual basis, one is better suited and one is less so, right? And you got to look at it through that lens, right? So, all right, so the next point there is strength pyramid is what I've written, right? Strength pyramid. So when it comes to, so this is a very simple way. This is something that was, I can't remember where I first heard this, but it was, certainly didn't conceptualize this. Everything's stolen from somewhere else. When it comes to understanding, I suppose, the program and then progress, and this is why it's important to express this to clients as well, so that they understand what it is we're putting through. If we think about the geometric shape that is a pyramid is only as tall as it is wide, right? It's only as tall as it is wide. Have a think about it. Triangle, right? Big equilateral triangle. Now, in order for us to build a really tall pyramid, we need to build a really broad base, right? Because you're not going to go very high unless you go very wide to start with. And you can't build more pyramid at the top of a pyramid, right? You need to start again at the bottom if you want to build a bigger pyramid for what was already there, right? And so that pyramid represents, say, a training cycle, right? Over a period of weeks or months, right? A period of months. And if at the end of that intended training cycle, that 12 weeks, 16 weeks, whatever it might be, you know, there's some goals set out. I want to achieve this lift, or I want to achieve a certain degree of muscularity. There's a certain aesthetic result, all right? Then, all right, cool. Well, what does that sort of look like from a programming standpoint? What aligns with that? What sort of sense of basic sort of progression and progressive overload, written into a program throughout that time? Now, what's the end sort of look like? Any good plan is sort of reverse engineered, right? This is where I want to be. How do I get there from, work backwards? Rather than just sort of shoot from the hip and be like, oh, here I am now, let's do some shit, and like that's the general direction I want to go. It's inefficient, right? Doesn't mean you're not going to get there, but you're not going to get there efficiently because you didn't devise as well of a plan as you could have or should have. So a pyramid is only as tall as it is wide. And so what does that mean? It means at the bottom of that pyramid, at the beginning of the training cycle, we are going to be focusing on more volume, less intensity. So you're not pushing everything to failure. You might have 2 or 3 in the tank, or 1 or 2 in the tank, for instance. But ultimately, you're going to be focused on technique the most. Now, technique is always important, right? Because technique ensures safety and it ensures efficiency, right? But when do we need technique the most, right? We need technique the most when we are at the top of the pyramid, right? We need technique the most when the weight is heaviest, when our intensity is the greatest, when we're doing sets in which they're super hard immediately. That is when we need our technique. But ironically, we don't have the bandwidth mentally to think about our technique when we need it the most. So what do? We need to institute good technical habits when we need it the least, ironically, right? And that's where people fuck up, right? That's where people fuck up. If you're doing a set of 15 on a dumbbell press, right? A flat dumbbell press. This was just me. I just coach former versions of myself, right? Like what could have gotten through my thick fucking head when I was younger, right? Well, if you want to lift something really heavy and or get really jacked, whatever your goal is, well, in order to sort of make the appropriate progressions over time, we have to appreciate that as shit gets more difficult, we progressively overload over a period of time. Your margin for error becomes smaller. So the necessity for your technique to be more dialed in becomes greater. But as I mentioned, with added load and added intensity, especially when it becomes super challenging earlier on when you're doing lower rep stuff, even like 6, doesn't have to be like 3 or 1 or 2, but you're doing things like maybe 8 or 6, right? That's even relatively low, single digits. And so it's pretty hard either immediately or within a couple of reps. It gets really hard really quick. And so if you need to have good technique habits instilled, otherwise, 1, it's a safety concern, but 2, there is no way for you to determine when you start to fatigue whether or not you've gone into questionable technique or not. right? You don't know because you haven't set a high enough standard and recognized what good technique is. You're just creating a gray area of anything being acceptable. And so with that, what you do is you lower the standard of what your technique is, and ultimately you're lowering the standard of the potential progress you can achieve based on that lower standard, knowing that the height of the pyramid that you want to build within this cycle, and then the next cycle, and then the next one over that, and so on, the height of your pyramid is going to be limited by your technique. Because the only way in which to build a high pyramid when shit is really hard straight away and consistently so is to have robust technique that you don't have to think about. People will often ask me when it comes to performing like a super heavy squat, or what are you thinking about when you're sort of halfway up? I'm not thinking about fucking anything at all throughout the entire process. All my thought has been taken care of well before I got to that point. I'm thinking far more about my technique when I'm doing some split squats, bodyweight split squats as my warm-up routine prior to even having the barbell on my back, and then the empty bar, and I'm sort of feeling the first sort of lead-up set before I'm putting several plates on the bar, right? By the time it gets to a point that my technique needs to be good and I need to be on, like I'm not thinking about anything, right? The work needs to be done well before that point. So when you get to the point where you need good technique, you don't think about it, right? So we want to focus on your technique at the bottom of that pyramid, because say you're doing sets of 15. So I was saying before, I got off track. You're doing sets of 15 on, say, a dumbbell press, something nice and simple. Now, it's not going to get, so doing 15, you couldn't do 16, right? Say, you couldn't do 16. So it's a 15 rep max. And it's only going to get real hard until maybe like set 12, it'll start to get like difficult, and then 13, and then 14, and then 15, it's a little bit shaky. All right, cool, you pop it down. Well, you've done 12 out of 15 reps that were what I'd consider sort of low intensity, right? Because you were still 5 reps away from failure, and then more so, right? And so your exposure to comfortably performed repetitions is significant, right? The vast majority of your repetitions, the vast majority of the technique you've been exposed to has been at a sub-level intensity, which allows you to really think about how you position and where you're feeling tension. Is your upper back position well? How are the shoulders moving? Are my elbows working in sync? Whatever it might be. Again, the more moving parts in the exercise, the more to think about, and the more this sort of has validity, right? So by the time you get to, say, rep 12 in this instance, you're able to maintain it, and your bandwidth in terms of what you're thinking about becomes less. Your bandwidth, can you guys mute if you're going to cough, please? The bandwidth becomes less. I'm very easily distracted. Becomes less as to what you're thinking about. But you've done your due diligence and worked hard from reps 1 to 12. So by the time it gets really difficult, you don't have to think about it. You're just continuing on with that momentum, right? Guys, if you're not muted, can you mute, please? I'm just getting noises. I'm very easily distracted. I've only just woken up. So as you progress up that pyramid, each sort of layer of that pyramid, there is less volume and more focus on load, right? Load and volume are inversely correlated, right? The more volume you want to do, the less load you can lift, and the more load you want to lift, the less volume you can do, right? And so that's why pyramid works well. If we talk about, if you were to cross section that pyramid at different points, that cross section refers to the volume, right? And the height refers to sort of the load, right? And so as you're moving up that pyramid, at each progressive point, at each stage of a given training cycle, maybe it's 16 weeks and you've got 4-week blocks, for instance, right? Well, with each one, you want to progress maybe the technical components of the movements, but let's look at the reps and sets, right? You're going to make progressions in terms of a reduction in volume, an increase in the expected load, and with that, maybe an increase in intensity. So the proximity to failure becomes a lot closer, or at least, towards the top of that pyramid, you're prompting someone to push to failure on pretty much every set, right? But they've earned the right to get there because they've built up robust capacity to deal with that, deal with that level of intensity and that recoverability, but also they have built up the technical components necessary. So when they're doing a set of 5 reps and shit's super fucking hard immediately, they don't have to think about it because they did all their thinking at the bottom of that pyramid. Where people falter is they wait until they get to the top of that pyramid when shit gets really difficult. And then even if they have a program, a lot of people don't have a program designed in such, an appropriate way, or they just live at the top of the pyramid, right? You're trying to build more pyramid at the top of the pyramid. Doesn't fucking work, right? I used to do that all the time. Doesn't work. And every day every deadlift day, it would just be max out 1 reps, because that's what I thought deadlifting was, right? Deadlifting was, as much as you could lift. So I want to, just incrementally get a little bit more than I did last week. I didn't understand the value of doing sets of 8 and doing pauses and then building capacity and building, higher standard of technique, which ultimately will lead to a better result over time, right? That's why I speak passionately about this shit, because I didn't have this guidance when I was younger, and I spent a lot of time inefficiently achieving a result, right? But I achieved results in spite of the holes in what I was doing, right? So, yeah. So I'll leave it that. Leave that one there. I think I've pretty much wrapped that up well. And next point. Lovely. So last point in this sort of section, stimulus over stats is what I've written. Stimulus over stats. Now, what that refers to is, I suppose, this is more of something, to express to clients, right? And understand for ourselves, what is it we're doing at the gym, right? Like, what are we guided by in respect to, what are we chasing, right? We're chasing increased metrics, right? Increased weights, increased volumes at given weights, right? And so it's important that the standards we set for our technique are as high as possible. So we don't cut corners in chasing greater numbers, right? Because ultimately your body doesn't care, doesn't identify the weight that you lift, it doesn't have eyeballs, right? The meat machine that is your body doesn't know that you've got X amount of plates on the bar or wherever the pin is on the stack or something like that. Your body responds to the way in which that load creates stress upon the body, right? If you've got 12 plates on a leg press, but you're going, little dicky partial reps, your body's going to respond to that lack of quality stimulus and that lack of range of motion, right? If you halve the weight, but go full range, better control, slower tempo, your body's going to respond a whole lot better because the higher quality performance of that technique. The load is simply a vehicle to achieve a stimulus, right? The load is a vehicle to achieve a stimulus. The load isn't the be all and end all of what we're doing, right? And then this is something really important when we're explicitly looking to achieve strength goals, because to get stronger, by definition, we need to be lifting heavier weights, right? We need to be lifting heavier weights. It's the definition of getting stronger, lifting something heavier, right? But even if we have more aesthetic goals, we want to grow muscle, we're still using the metric that is lifting more weight over time as our focus of whether or not we are improving, right? Because you're not getting muscle biopsies every week, and sort of other metrics are not really that valid, right? As long as you are eating adequately, you are seeing improvements in the gym in terms of the metrics that are lifting more weight, it's very safe to assume that you're gaining muscle, right? And your programming is appropriately structured in such a way, right? So we are chasing the metric that is lifting more weight over time or more volume, right, at the same weight. So we're making statistical improvements. Well, it's very easy to, when looking to chase that goal, to cut corners, right? If we look at, say, a bench press, right? We see a guy, it's Monday, that's when everyone bench presses. You've got 60 kilos on the bar. He's got a 20 kilo plate on either side, big fucking beating his chest. Does fucking 10 reps like this, right? All right, cool. Statistically, he got 60 kilos, 10 reps. Then he trains with his mate, and his mate slows, controlled, little pause, lockout, good. Takes about 4 times as long per rep, right? Same stats, 60 kilos, 10 reps. The stimulus difference couldn't be further apart, right? So that's just one set as an example, right? If we expand upon that as a training ethos and a way in which you apply yourself to training, yes, the stats are what we're chasing from a metric of progress over time because we need something there, right? But it needs to be performed in such a way. We need to make sure that the stats accurately represent the stimulus, right? We want the stats accurately representing the stimulus because ultimately it's the stimulus that we want, right? It's the stimulus that we want, not the stats. The stats are there to reflect the stimulus that we're wanting to achieve, right? Because ultimately, who gives a shit if on paper you say, I lifted this much weight? I hear that all the time. You know, people will say to me, you know, as if they like beating their chest, oh, I can do this. I don't give a fuck. You like honestly, it's like where are your results, mate? Because it's all like the stimulus is what we want, right? The stimulus is what we want. We want to get stronger. We want to grow muscle. We want to help drop some body fat, whatever the goal might be, right? But it's the quality which is the gatekeeper. Our technique, it's the link between those two, right? We want as much of a 1-for-1 as possible. So we want as much of a close relationship between the stats that we achieve, how many reps and the weight associated, and the stimulus from that. And our technique is the gatekeeper, right? Our technique is the gatekeeper because there's no point having statistical improvements on paper. It's only going to be detrimental, one, to your psychological progress, because over time you're like, oh yeah, I went from here to here in terms of, you know, progress on a particular lift or across a number of lifts, but they still look like, you know, a wet blanket and like when they first started, right? It is what it is. So these are all points, you know, and I deliver with enthusiasm because I'm trying to bury myself into a former version of myself, right? And be like, hey, you know, all that time you spent doing shit wrong? Yeah, you could have been a lot more efficient, right? So I think ultimately when I've spoken to a lot of trainers, especially those who've been around for a while, Sean, I think you're the same way. It's like you're just trying to help a former version of yourself, right? Because ultimately that's when I think it comes from a really genuine place. And you see yourself or a version of yourself in so many people, and myself and other coaches, and be like, you know, you're doing shit wrong, right? But it's like, it's not that you have bad intentions. It's like you know, it's just misunderstanding the details, right? Not understanding how you know, critical we need to be when it comes to these things. And again, being critical isn't about being complicated. It's just understanding additional considerations to ensure that the decisions that we make can be as well aligned with someone's goals and our own goals as possible. And we won't know the ramifications of poor decisions until enough time passes. You look back and be like, oh, didn't get very far, did I? Right? Or just accept it for what it is. Shit results, right? All right, so the last point, if you haven't already, any questions? No, if you haven't already, no, people have. All those people left. Go fuck yourselves. How rude. I just opened the chat and it tells you everyone that's left. It's like, oh my goodness. So last point. Yeah, if you haven't, I know I was going to say you haven't already, no one has. Feel free to throw some questions in the chat because I want to answer some questions. I've got nowhere else to be, right? It's 6 in the morning, 10 past 6. I'm going to be sitting here for most of the day. I'm editing a video with my mum after this, actually. And I'm on two minds whether to, like, I'm going to post it because she's impressive and I just use her for likes and attention. But I hadn't shaved, right? And I just look like a fucking homeless man. But the thing is, like, the irony is I'm wearing like super bright clothes. I'm wearing like these fucking big purple pants that I have on at the moment, and like a bright green shirt in pastel, right? It sounds more awful than it looks. But then I look like a homeless man. So anyway, just get zoomed to her all the time. So anywhere else to be. That's what I'm talking about. So last point. master exercise technique, cueing, and coaching. So a lot of this, or at least part of this, has been sort of touched on in regards to communication, right? Because our coaching and our cueing is very much aligned, obviously, with the way in which we communicate, right? It's all part and parcel, right? But to boil it down, here are some key points. Excuse me. So all exercises will break down in highly predictable ways. Exercises will break down in highly predictable ways. So on that point, right, if we know how an exercise is going to break down, we can mitigate that from happening before it does, right? And to another point here I've written, which is sort of the next point, is that, and again, there's overlapping here, about being proactive, not reactive, right? Proactive, not reactive. Don't wait until the movement starts to break down to then go, oh, your back's fucked, and then try to fix it up. Well, we know a deadlift will break down in a predictable way, a squat will break down in a predictable way, a press, a row, whatever, right? Even as something as simple as a seated cable row, something a bit more vanilla than a bigger, more complex barbell movement, right? Typically, people will either, in that example, just there are, and if you know exercises, this is why knowing techniques on exercise is so important, right? That's why I push it so much, because if you know the technique of an exercise really well, and you know how the body functions, and you know how the stress placed upon the body in a particular exercise when repetitively exposed will respond, right? The body will respond in predictable ways. You will know how to cue someone to mitigate that from happening before it does. Simply put, right? Someone's performing a seated cable row, even if they start really well, it's not about how well someone can perform a movement. This is another point. Did I write it down? I think I wrote it somewhere. It's not about how well someone can perform a movement. It's about how well that movement can be maintained under more intensity, fatigue, and volume, right? Someone can move really well. This is what I describe as someone who has, I haven't used this term in a while, unconsciously good technique. Unconsciously good technique, right? So this is usually, I find this in terms of a demographic, I typically find this in a young female, so early 20s, who has a history of sport when they were younger, right? And so they tend to be very coachable. They tend to move really well. They tend to be able to see, say myself, see someone perform a movement, be able to mimic it really well, right? All right, happy days. They can perform a squat. So they're not inhibited by mobility limitations. They don't have a lot of muscle mass to get in the way as well. They don't have, their proprioception is really good, and they're very coachable. Great people to work with. But the potential folly of that is that that person will move really well because all the contributing factors I just mentioned, but their inability to maintain a good position when fatigue starts to accumulate is pretty shit, right? Because they haven't earned that technique. Does that make sense? Right? They haven't earned it. They don't understand what it is that they're doing to a high enough level of consciousness to be able to maintain good technique when it's challenged, right? So that's something that I found out, not the hard way, but I found out just working with a wide range of people over the years I was working with face-to-face. And there was a consistency of girls in that sort of demographic, late teens, early 20s, things like that, who, and not the only people, but sort of it was much more, disproportionately in that sort of subcategory. Because they move well and they're, oh, cool, great. Squatting, fantastic. As soon as fatigue started to accumulate, they just fucking fall apart, right? And you're like, your technique was good. What happened to it? And then, I just from a problem-solving standpoint, be like, why? It's like, oh, this person moves well, but they just move well because they take instruction well and they're not inhibited by any sort of limiting factor mobility-wise, right? Oh, okay, cool. So how do we work with someone like that? It's sort of going down a rabbit hole here, but how do we work with someone like that? It's like, well, we have to be more intentional with the tempo, with pausing, with really reinforcing positions and less load and really enforcing better intention, really helping people to drive an understanding of where they are throughout a movement. 1 1/4 squats, or as an example, which is typically more of an advanced overload technique, but at a light load, it's a means to really drive intention and body awareness as to where something is, where their body is at a given point in time. It's certainly better than having someone who is really stiff and immobile, right? Because they're easy to work with, they move more freely, but you just have to approach that person differently because they can move really well, but they haven't earned that right just yet, right? So the ability to then push them too hard, you kind of need to sort of pump the brakes a little bit on the intensity sooner, and sort of like keep them there. It's called a simmer at a point where they're not going too hard because their capabilities are up here, but their sort of their conditioning or familiarity is down here. So we need to sort of level them out a bit more. So went down a hell of a rabbit hole there. So where I started, this is the seminar, right? I'm just down rabbit holes all day. That is also why I have a run sheet, because it's accountability to me and be like, no, get back here. So what I was referring to, because I feel like I need to at least complete what I was talking about, the seated cable row. That's where I started, right? So if someone's performing a seated cable row, we know, if you know the movement well, how it's predictably going to be fucked up, right? Now, I keep wanting to pass it to someone. Tell me how it's going to be fucked up, because that's what I'll do in the seminar. I'll get someone to sort of put their hand up and let me know what they think, right? And then make them feel bad about it when they don't get it right. No, I don't do that. It's just a means to sort of give people an opportunity to, express their position on it. And then I can sort of unpack and be like, okay, you're not wrong, but let me provide a little bit more detail, a little bit of a different perspective, right? So if we're performing a seated cable row, you think about what is the movement, right? Okay, we're trying to extend the upper back, right? Extend the upper back and bring the shoulder blades together and down, right? Retract and depress the shoulder blades while we extend the thoracic spine, to be technical, right? So pulling the shoulder blades together and down, sticking the chest out, squeezing the upper back, right? We're also pulling the arm back, directed by the elbow, right? Now, if we understand the demands upon the upper back are far greater than the demands upon the arm, right? What is the body, knowing that the body is hardwired to offer the path of least resistance, right? It just wants to make shit easy. So if we don't hold a high enough standard, or we don't have tight enough parameters around what we're doing and how we're doing it, the body's going to find the easiest way in which to do the basic instruction that we've told it to do. That's why our intention behind our action is really important, right? Not just focusing on the action, okay? So if we're doing a seated cable row, the action is pulling the handle towards us, right? Yeah, simple. Pull the handle towards us. That's the action. Now, if that's all that's guiding us, the body's going to take the path of least resistance. And the easiest thing to do immediately is just pull the handle to us. And it's going to use a lot more elbow, a lot more bicep, a lot more forearm, right? Versus the back, right? Because it's a lot more demanding to extend the upper back, pull the shoulder blades together, and demand those muscles of the upper back do that work. Because they aren't necessary to pull the handle to us, right? It's a lot easier to just bring the handle to us and overload the arms. So if we know that is how the exercise is typically going to be fucked up, that's how it's going to be flawed, is understanding, how the body responds to stress, right? And if we aren't intentional enough, how is the body then going to respond? Well, we want to direct the elbows back and stick the chest out as much as possible. And because we, again, simple as that, elbows back, chest out, right? That's what I think about. Elbows back, chest out, shoulders back, done. And we are going to be disproportionately challenged in terms of the upper back. There's a lot more muscle in the upper back. The structure that is your thoracic spine and shoulder blades have to work a lot harder to get yourself into the appropriate position versus your arm. Your elbow is a very strong joint. It's very dominant. It'll work a lot more, but the muscles aren't as big and we're not trying to target them, right? So if we understand the difference between the mechanics of the elbow, that of the upper back, and the way in which we're trying to load the upper back and only use the arm to facilitate, we can sort of put this in our head and be like, oh, well, the body will happily just load it as our arms. And then you'll do your 10 reps, your 12 reps, your 15 reps, your arms will be fucking tired, but your back will be there going, hey, I've got more to give, but it can't because your arms are fatigued, right? Now, it might sound a bit complicated, right? But it's not, right? It's just understanding that the body will make shit as easy as possible in any circumstance. And ultimately, you'll do your reps, and this goes back to stats and stimulus, right? You can do the reps, lift the weight, and make progress on paper, but you won't have the results to show for it because the technique as that gatekeeper wasn't a high enough standard. And it wasn't because that person didn't try, but they just weren't well informed enough to know what they needed to focus on and what they wanted to mitigate from happening. Again, technique will break down, exercises, will break down in predictable ways, right? And that sort of breakdown when fatigue accumulates or just breakdown because the right directives weren't instituted in the first place, right? So, yeah, I think that's what I have to say on that one. Yeah, good. So normally I would throw out the questions at this point, right? When I'm working with people face to face, be like, does that make sense? All good? No? Any further question? Someone will go, what about this? And then I'll go down another rabbit hole. So that's another thing about the seminar, right? So it's as interactive as, I'd like it to be as interactive as possible, right? Because ultimately, across the points that I cover on the day, there's only so much you can cover at one time, right? And so I've boiled it down to what I feel is a good spread. But with that, I definitely encourage people asking questions because someone will go, oh, what about Steve? Got to go. Unacceptable, Steve. Thank you, Steve, for letting me know. The rest didn't. Fuck them. Because you might ask a question about a particular, I don't know, whatever, on a particular topic that I'm talking about, be like, oh, cool. And then I'll unpack that and we'll dive into that for like 5 minutes. All right. The seminar is not a, it's fine, Steve. Don't worry about it. Apologizing. It's not a lecture like student teacher type dynamic, right? I'm just a bloke who is a bit autistic when it comes to this stuff and have prided myself on being able to communicate what I think very effectively when it comes to these sort of ideas, right? Like I said, I just position myself, I position the way in which I communicate to former versions of myself. And whether that be 14, 15-year-old me who didn't know his head from his asshole, or sort of the later stages of my teenage years or early 20s when I started becoming a PT and still did not pay attention. It was a in-person PT course. I remember I was doing that course and I was at a time, I've tried everything stupid you can try. That was at a time where I hate broccoli, right? Hate it. I'm a fucking gag. And I had like chicken, sweet potato, mash, and broccoli in a takeaway, Tupperware container, and I'd have it as a thing, but I still wouldn't pay attention, right? Because that's how fucking retarded I was, right? I thought that's what I needed to do in order to get lean, and you get like this little squeeze of barbecue sauce for a little bit of flavor. Man, I had like the biggest bowl of Cocoa Pops yesterday, just in the middle of the day because I wanted to. It's probably like 1,200 calories, right? It's just like it's like shit, And that was me trying to think that, oh, that's what bodybuilders do. You know what I mean? What an idiot. Okay. Next point under the mastering exercise technique, cueing, and coaching. Let it be slow. Let it be slow. So let it be slow is unquestionably my favorite and most universally applicable cue across all exercises, right? Now, if we think about sort of the main exercises that most people get wrong the most, is that there's bigger barbell movements, those movements that have more joints working together to create the overall movement, your squats, your deadlifts, your lunges, and whatnot, right? And to my point before in regards to the strength pyramid, where we have a greater exposure to volume at the bottom of that pyramid and less focus on intensity, that's where we can focus on technique the most. We need technique we need technique the least is when we want to focus on it the most. So when we need it the most, don't think about it. we need to think through the lens of how will this movement feel and be performed? What is the speed expectation of this movement? Knowing that lifting something fucking heavy is going to be slow, or at least not even super heavy, but as it gets really hard, close to fatigue, how are we going to be impacted by it? Again, predictably knowing how the movement is going to break down. Speed, slowing down, is a key factor and the universal factor across all exercises. As something starts to become really challenging, the first thing to happen is that your ability to move that load slows down, right? Unquestionable. And so if we have that notion in our heads and we just tell ourselves, allow it to be slow, allow it to be slow. You think, why does someone fuck up a deadlift or a squat and their hips shoot up out of the bottom? It's because they're trying to force speed upon the movement upwards that they don't have the capacity to do relative to the load and the intensity of what they're trying to lift, right? It's no other reason that someone has performed maybe a large cachet of repetitions at a lower intensity, you're squatting, you're deadlifting, for instance, and they could move the load relatively quickly because it was less intense or less heavy or both. And as soon as the weight starts to become a little bit more heavy and or closer to fatigue, they still have this idea that they can stand up and move at the same rate of speed that they could have when the shit was easier or lighter. So we need to prepare ourselves. Again, the same reason why we have the same premise that we have the focus on technique at the bottom of the pyramid. So at the top of the pyramid, when we need it, it's already there. So when we're focusing, we're doing sets on deadlifts. Let's look at deadlifts. Someone's performing a deadlift and pulling something heavy from the floor, even if it's not maximal, you're starting with the concentric phase. You're starting with the hard part. You're going from 0 to 100, no load to 100% of the load, like that. And so we need to put in a lot of force, right? Need to put a lot of force in order to move that load. But we also want to make sure that we don't confuse and conflate the difference between force and fast, right? People think, I've got to pull it fast. No. You want to be forceful. You want to be powerful. That will produce as much speed as you have the capacity to do. But we don't want to sacrifice maintaining the right position for just moving quickly, because you'll just move quickly out of position, right? What I like to say is a little soundbite. You can either move slow and maintain the right position, or you can move quickly out of position. You can't have both. You can't move quickly and maintain the right position at a challenging load or a challenging intensity. Simply put, you have to allow it to be slow, right? So you need to allow it to be slow before it gets to the point where the load controls the speed, right? So if we're moving a load which is light and or the intensity isn't sort of ball-bustingly hard, then we have the ability to control the speed, right? Because and this is, I suppose, what I was going to mention, I'm glad it sort of came back into my head, was the position of our movement in any exercise are constant, right? Irrespective of the load, irrespective of the intensity, irrespective of the goals, we want to be in the same position because it's the most efficient way to perform a squat or a deadlift or a lunge or whatever, right? The technique doesn't change. The position doesn't change, right? It might change a little bit person to person depending upon someone's individual mechanics, but based to us, it's going to be the same. What is a variable? So that the position is a constant. The variable, thinking about mathematics here, the variable is the speed, right? Now, when the load is lighter, the intensity is less, we have control over that variable. We have control over the speed. But we have to accept there comes a point of load and intensity of that load within a given, exercise that we no longer have control of the speed. The barbell, the load itself controls the speed. If we want to champion and prioritize the position in which we're in, right? So even to a more simple exercise, right? Say a lunge. So we're doing a reverse lunge, right? You're at the, you take a step back and then come forward. Well, in the bottom position of a lunge, we're stretching the glutes, right? Stretching the glutes on the front leg. Well, our muscles are weakest in their lengthened position, right? So it stands to reason, especially the glutes in that position, they're not in a favorable position from that lengthened position to respond the way we want them to be biased in such a way and move quickly, right? It's not going to happen. You don't want to just perform the movement and then go back and forward quickly. You're trying to load yourself in quite an intendedly specific way, right? Take a step back, load the body in a certain way, allow yourself to come forward appropriately slow, right? Now, the concentric phase of any movement should be done with a degree of force. It should be done forcefully, with intent, firmly. But it's important not to conflate being firm and being forceful with being fast. You know, I like alliteration, right? Because people will go, I want to go fast. It's like, no, you want to go as fast as you can based on maintaining a good position, right? So let it be slow is the most universal cue. What I mentioned before, so being proactive, not reactive, right? Again, we know how exercises are going to break down before they break down. We know that more often than not, if you put enough weight on the bar or perform enough repetition, a deadlift you'll always see someone's back start to flex in the deadlift, right? Now, depending upon an individual, what's that book there? Any good? Now, yeah, so someone's back is flexing. someone's back is flexing in a deadlift. Depending upon the individual, it may be okay, it may be a little bit of thoracic flexion, it may be a little bit of lumbar flexion, which we want to avoid because the lower back is going to get cranky, right? Now, if we know that an individual or ourselves are able to maintain a pretty solid position through their spine up until a certain point, load-wise or intensity-wise, and then, oh, there goes that issue again. It's like, well, don't wait until it occurs. No, institute the right directives and the right cues that are going to reinforce. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It just that means we don't want it to happen prematurely. Because the irony of what we're doing in the gym is we're trying to encourage fatigue. We're trying to encourage breakdown, but we just don't want it to happen prematurely, right? If you're able to get 12 reps out in a given set, we don't want to fail at 9 because of inefficiencies that were plaguing the first sort of 9 reps. We want to get to 12, right? And that's sort of to my point earlier in respect to programming, but obviously this is the same thing, is that we're not going to be able to substantiate results we don't achieve. We just don't achieve them, right? You don't know if you failed at 9 that you could have gotten 12 if your technique was that much better. You just don't get the 12, right? And it's the same thing with the accumulation of results over time. You don't know that you could have achieved twice as much results in the 6-month period of time that we're hypothetically talking about, but you achieved 3 months worth of results in 6, right, instead of a full 6. You're not going to know that because you achieved some results, but you don't realize you could have achieved a lot more, right? You can't substantiate that. No one can accurately determine how far you can go within a period of time. Can't be done. But we do know we will get you as far as possible if the decisions you make around programming are as dialed in and taking on considerations as best they can. And your technique is as high of a quality as possible and always looking to improve upon that, right? Now, we don't know how far you could go, but we know you're going to get as far as possible within that time period if we're critical enough, right? So that's both across programming and technique, right? But that's not complicated. It's not complicated. It's just understanding the folly and the what we're going to be let down by potentially and being proactive about it, not reactive, right? Not waiting for problems to occur, knowing how the body's going to respond in very predictable ways. Okay, so the last point, if we have any, I think you got no questions. Okay, I'll go for myself. All right, cool. So the last point, or I was going to make it sort of practically applying knowledge is key. I suppose we don't have an information problem. We have an application problem. Okay, we don't have an information problem. We have an application problem, right? And so what I mean by that is we are blessed I suppose, with an abundance of information nowadays, right? You can spend all day, every day on YouTube and absorb a lot of great information, right? But it's the specificity or lack thereof, I should say, that becomes the issue. And information is great. What I'm presenting today is obviously fantastic, but it comes down to understanding that we need to be exposing ourselves to a robust assortment of information relative to what it is we want to learn, but then applying it to people with enough grace, for lack of a better word, to know that we don't know the efficacy of the information and the applicability of that information until it's applied to people and us ultimately as well. You know, us as coaches, being the guinea pigs of our own process, right? As we should be. You take information from me, take information from Sean here, we take information from anyone on YouTube or anyone you like. I like their shtick. I like what they're about, right? And I like the way they communicate, I like the information, but understand, don't take it as gospel, right? Because ultimately, as I mentioned in regards to the individual nature of sort of programming decisions and working with someone, getting to know a person, right? We don't know how something is going to be best applied until it's applied to a person. And you've always got to be playing devil's advocate when it comes to your own decisions, you know, and it's not about not being satisfied or not having conviction around your own decisions. It's just understanding the nature of what we do is working with people on an individual basis, and we don't know how appropriate it's going to be until it's applied. Case in point, that's why a individually prescribed program will always outperform a generic program across the board, right? Doesn't mean a generic program. I have a generic program, you know, that I sell online, right? It's a subscription-based program, but it's more just for people that are for more budget conscious, right? And it's a good program. It's solid, you know, updates every month sort of thing, right? Now, on an individual basis, would those same people, those same participants in that cohort get a better result if they had something more specific? 1000%, right? But ultimately, like in that example, it's down to a budgeting consideration, which is why I have it, to give people that option, right? So when it comes to us and the way in which we interact with people, you know, I suppose if there's one thing to sum up everything I've covered, it's the focus on individual considerations, right? Individual considerations. And that doesn't mean that we add complication and fluff to what we're doing. It's not to be fluffy. It's just to understand that everyone's a little bit different. Everyone buys into the process a little bit differently. Some people dislike different exercises, and we're not going to know that until we throw some shit at them and see what sticks, right? Now, are there any questions or no? Okay, great, cool. Now, Sean, did you want to add any questions to that? You can unmute yourself if you like. Do I need to unmute you?
What I was going to say there, Sean, is I think everybody was just being super quiet to let you get through the material. I'm sure everybody was.
I asked them to be on mute because, you know, I'm so easily distracted. It's outrageous.
And Steve was coughing quite a lot in his fucking chateau in France there.
Was that Steve?
Yeah,
it's such a Steve thing to do.
He's a good guy. He actually, that was his thing. When he was doing the PT course, he had this vision that he always wanted to do this. He always wanted to move to France and buy a chateau and do it up. And,
so you're not even taking the piss?
He's really genuine. Yeah. He's got a chateau. He has, and he's training people out of the basement of his fucking chateau. When he said Steve in Paris, I'm like, there are no organic Steves in Paris. Not Paris, France. Sorry, in France. Yeah. So now that we're unmuted and we're having a bit of a chat, then does anybody have any questions for Sean if they want to unmute themselves and give us a shout there? I'm sure Carla has something to say. She's been scribbling notes. She's had her head down, scribbling notes like a good thing there.
Way to put me on the spot. No, I actually don't, but I did find the session like wholly beneficial, Sean. So just to say thanks so much.
You're very
for
welcome.
that.
I was watching you just instantly. Okay, cool, write that down. That's the thing about when providing information in this sort of context, right? It's such an inorganic way in which this is why I like doing seminars, right? Because it's so much more of an organic way in which to share information, because not just the back and forth that can be taken on in regards to, you absorbing the information and then feel comfortable enough to be like, I always leave after I'll say, so many points that I covered today, right? I'll be like, any questions? That makes sense? And just ask for further clarification or unpack something like, oh, maybe it sparked a question, right? But don't have that here, right? Otherwise, it gets a little bit out of control. And watching you, for instance, sort of like, oh, yeah, note that down. And it makes it a little bit more organic for me, right? Because when not having, and something I've gotten used to when working with people online, right? Because I'll provide feedback to clients via video message, right? And it's one way, right? Which is fine. I can, as you can tell, talk the fucking back legs off a chair. But not having the typically organic interaction or cues of a head nod or things like that when providing information. And then that sort of ultimately, for those of you that have working with people online or just generally, is that it definitely forces you to refine. Well, it did for me. I was good at it anyway, but it forced me to level up and refine how I communicate, because I don't have the immediate response from someone, right? If I'm providing someone in-person feedback, if it doesn't quite land, I can see it on their face if what I'm saying doesn't quite land, right? And that's what's allowed me to refine how I communicate over time. But when doing it remotely online, someone's providing me video feedback on either they might be giving me like a little unpack, little debrief video on their session where they're talking to the camera, or it could be just a cache of videos of their exercises. And so from that, I need to be as on point with my feedback as possible, so I'm confident that they don't then watch that, listen to it, and be like, be somewhat, I want them to be on and understanding as everything that I say immediately, right? And so, because I don't want to have to go back and forth. Like, oh, can you explain your video from the other day? And it's like, oh, what did I actually say? You know what I mean? It's super clunky, right? And so it just forces you to be more refined. Any questions, guys? Anything at all?
Goodrun was there. I've seen Goodrun taking quite a few notes. Goodrun, what have you got to say for yourself? You've been very quiet there.
Hi.
No,
No, yes, it was Carla. Thanks for putting me on the spot. But anyway, yeah, no, it was very good. Really enjoyed it. Very informative. Yeah, thank you very much, Steve. Sorry, Steve. Oh God, Sean.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, very like I've lots jotted down. I'll be going through that again. But yeah, it's making sense. I think applying it then is a whole different game than once you actually put it into practice. I suppose is where it really kind of.
Yeah, well, look, that's sort of why I sort of push the way I do, right? In regards to, that's why I sort of started the way I did in respect to, note things down, or at least just give yourself enough grace when it comes to your expectations on remembering shit, right? And that's not a you problem, that's just people, right? That's just memory, right? So that's why, again, if you just note things down, whether you be listening from today or you're watching a fucking YouTube video, don't just watch it. Take some notes, right? If you like, oh, cool, you're not going to remember it, right? Just write down a few notes and refer back to it, right? Create, some sort of either digital or physical. I'm a very sort of like old school. I've got a notepad here. I've got a diary here, which is all sort of paper. And it just allows you to note things down, and then from there you can refer back to it and put it in a place. For instance, if it's something that you really want to remember and refine and level up, put it in a place that you see it every day. Right. So I've got a big old desk here, and not that I have anything like that at the moment necessarily, but I certainly have in the past, where I would have, little post-it note type thing, and I'd have it written there as it was always a prompt. Yeah. Because otherwise you're only going to sort of think about these things or like in a moment when you might be coaching someone, and those moments are few and far between, but you also want it to be ready for those moments. And ironically, it probably won't be if you're only waiting for those moments, right? And so, if we need to expose ourselves to that information as frequently as possible, it doesn't have to be, overwhelming in terms of how much, but just frequent enough that it's there, right?
Yeah, keep it ready. Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Well, I think, Sean, you've given them bloody plenty. The only thing to do now, guys, is to, if you haven't already got a ticket, get your ticket and show up for the live event, because that's where the execution of all of this theoretical information.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, look, these are sort of talking points I've taken from the seminar, right? And there'll be a lot more expansion and obviously direction with it, and then specificity when it comes to sort of certain exercises and actual, more detail with programming, breaking down exercises, how to coach them properly, not just a seated cable row, but just understanding sort of like these sort of basic principles of how to work with people, how to understand movements and stuff yourself, because ultimately, even again, this is why the seminar is as applicable to everyone, right? Because everyone is a gym goer, right? Everyone's a gym goer, right? And then coaches who will attend the seminar don't just need to pay attention to what's being presented to improve their own experience, but they are to then pay attention to what's being said and how it's being said, how the communication is being presented, because ultimately that is going to be our link between us and our clients, right? And whether or not they are going to be as confident as they could be as quickly as possible, right? And like I said at the beginning, and one of the points was, it's not about what we know, it's about how well someone else can apply the knowledge. And if that's sort of the framework by which we conceptualize our communication with our clients and frame, all right, cool, could I have said that better? Or if someone doesn't understand it, this is a good point, right? If someone doesn't understand what we're saying, it's not about them being a dullard or something like that. They might be, but let's assume that they're not. It's about us not having explained and broken down what it is we're trying to communicate well enough, right? Because we need to take that on in order for them to take on the information that we need to get them to absorb, right? Because writing it off as if like they're the problem means that you're disempowering yourself by saying that they're the problem, right? It's like it's any issue that someone has in any relationship, right? People not taking ownership of their own of an issue, right? You can't fix a problem if you don't own the fact that the problem lands on you, right? If you're a shit person, but you think everyone else is a problem, you'll always be a shit person because you don't see yourself as the problem. Thus, you don't look at yourself as needing to be fixed, right? So when it comes to communicating with people, if someone doesn't understand, what it is you're trying to communicate when it comes to improving their deadlift or their whatever, it's less about them not understanding. It's more on you not being well adapted enough to communicate at a level that they can understand and then take them up from there. You may be giving them information that is appropriate to the level 5 version of themselves. They haven't got there yet. They're still on the ground floor. Right? So you've got to meet them where they are, get them to improve just a little bit, and then a little bit more, and that information that you maybe originally presented will come back around. You've got to earn the right to get there, right?
Lovely, Sean. Well, man, I think you've been very generous with your time. Thank you very much.
Well, like I said, I'm just looking at my list of things to do today. Most of it is just editing videos, to be honest. I've been pretty good this week with getting shit I need to get done. Yeah,
I've seen quite a good bit of content going up this week. All right, you're a busy dude.
But I'm enthused by progress and opportunity, right? I was a PT in a gym for many, many years. Like I said, waking up at 4 a.m, start at 5, walking to the gym, in shitty weather and shorts, and didn't have any sort of real growth potential in that place. This is obviously pre-COVID, right? Beyond just trading more time for money, right?
Mm.
And it was very like the job itself, working with people was fulfilling, but from a growth standpoint, personally, it wasn't. It was no longer scratching that itch. Along comes a global pandemic, and was very good to me in a number of ways. One of which forced me to work on my content more, which I just started to get a handle of prior to that, and forced me to to pivot, and it was at a really appropriate time, right? And so in terms of like being busy, it's like I've got the time, and it's how you utilize it, right? And so for me, it's like, all right, if I can, and again, it's fun creating content, right? It's again, so using my mum's content as an example, it's a reflection of someone of showcasing how she's an outlier. I don't know. She must be fucking punching heaps of steroids at home. I don't know. She's an outlier of an individual, but it showcases that irrespective of someone's age and experience, you can still make improvements, right? So it's a good, and it's a good sort of hyper example because she just looks like a quintessential mum, which she is, right? She could be anyone's mum in that respect. But she's just very strong, right? And so it's a great way in which to get that message out.
Mm-hmm.
But that's less useful, so I don't really share him that much. He's no good to me. He's falling apart.
All right, my man. Well, look, thanks very much for your time tonight. Thanks everybody for showing up.
Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate your time and attendance. I know it's fucking late there, yeah, if you haven't got a ticket already, please jump on. There are still some tickets available. Tickets are selling really well, so I'm really excited. When there's a bigger crowd of people, it's always more fun, right? And I haven't had a drink in like what will be probably 3 months by the time I get to Dublin. So I'll have half a Guinness and I'll be pissed. Which is fine. So I got nothing else to do the next day. I'm just flying to London. So all good.
I'm looking forward to it, Sean. I definitely buy you one of those 2 pints of Guinnesses, all right.
I'll try and split the G. Is that the goal?
Oh yes, yeah. If you can do that in one sip.
Yeah. Oh, that's the goal. That's the goal.
Okay, it's on.
It's a surprisingly big gulp. Surprisingly big gulp. You look at it and you're like, oh, it's not that big. You got to, give it a decent chug. Yeah, see how we go.
It'll take a bit of practice.
No doubt. All right. Well, look, I want to thank everyone for attending. Like I said, if you haven't got a ticket already, pull your finger out and grab one. And look to see you all there.
Thanks very much, Sean. See you all later on, guys.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you guys. Thanks.
Lovely, Sean.
Oh,
nice one. That was great content.
Yeah. Are we going to stop the recording?
Yeah, go ahead.
The recording has stopped.
Yeah, I don't know why that happened.
Neither do I. I don't know what the crack is there.
Yeah. Anyway, I got fucking most of it on my computer anyway. So what I can do is I will that's saved to my computer now, I suppose.
Yeah, will do. And also we get this Fathom thing that's installed into the Zoom. So it should, right after this we end this, it'll send an email of the transcription of the entire recording to their inbox.
Oh my god.
And it's really fucking accurate. Like, and it puts it into headings. You want to see the way it outlines this thing. As long as it did work there, but it's fucking brilliant. So like, we don't have to take meeting notes or anything. We do our meetings and stuff on this, and you get this fucking beautiful printout with like headings, subheadings, bullet points.
Wow.
Awesome.
That's obviously AI, right? That's great AI.
Oh, yeah. So that's the crack. Now here, where's ticket sales at now at the minute?
Well, what's his name? Dara? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
No? Yeah, he got some tickets.
Good job.
He got those 3 tickets.
Scott bought his.
Say it again, sorry?
Scott, he got his, didn't he?
Yes. So he got those earlier in the week, I believe it was. And so I got, because I cancelled my Belfast one because it just wasn't tracking. And again, I don't think the guys, really understood, even though I conveyed it to them, the effort that I kind of needed from them.
Yeah. Is that in the HQ, Sean?
Yes.
Yeah, they used to be hench.
Hench.
Pretty sure it was hench. Pretty sure I can't remember the guy's name. What's the guy's name that owns that?
Donald
Oh no.
McAllister, I believe.
All right, maybe I'm thinking of somebody else then. Right. He didn't know how to push it or couldn't market it, basically.
Well, I expressed to them that, like, you guys have gone above and beyond, so I'm very appreciative of that, right? But I've expressed it to them, like I have everyone else, that I said I'm just some cunt to some cunt, right? Like I said, you put me in front of a group of people, I'll win them over. Like, they'll have a great day, but I need assistance through the trust that they've created within their community to get people on board. I'll ensure that they have a great time, but beyond people who are maybe geographically, it's a geographic convenience for them to go, oh, cool, I live in the Dublin or Belfast. I like that. I follow that guy already. He's really good, right? There's only so many people of that, despite how big my following might be, right? Because it's a big step for them, people to commit to what I'm putting out there, right? Especially if it's a bit of an unknown for them, right? You put me in front of them, they're like, oh, that was well worth it, right? But it's like, that's after the fact, right? And so I did express that to them, that I need their assistance. And ultimately, I don't put deliverables on people, be like, I need you to do this, I need you to do that sort of thing. And I just express, before we make the commitment, what sort of assistance I need in terms of, like, emphasizing that point. And then I'll sort of leave it up to them to sort of, like, have conversation with their members. I'll provide some flyers or whatever they feel is appropriate, if they've got like a notice board or whatever, or do things like this, which is great. But yeah, ultimately, it's I've got no issue like canceling things, right? But look, it is what it is.
How many was on that?
Like, I've got one. I'm coming back to Ireland in September.
Right.
Because I got reached out to by some lads in Galway, right? And looking at the geography of Ireland and getting to Galway is a bit of a pain in the ass, right? And so I'm got to get into Dublin and then fucking get a train across, right? And so I expressed to them that basically the same thing. And I said, look, what I can do is, as a means to try to get early adopters, I said, I'll put on a what do you call it? An early bird special, right? And I said, look, I'll do you guys solid, and put on an early bird special, get a discount for like the first 15 people or something like that, right? And so, that's not till beginning of September. And so I announced, what I said is, I'm not going to announce it. I'll make the event live, and then I'll put it on you guys to get it to a certain number. I said, get me to 15 people, and then it's worth my while, because I'm coming over to Europe anyway, because I got IFS. I'm familiar with IFS, which is in Ibiza. I don't know how much fitness is going to go on in there, but so I'll be going over there for the second weekend in September. So the first weekend, I was like, look, I can do the first weekend in September. And so at the moment we're at 18 tickets sold for that, and that's not until the first week of September. And so for instance, like, I'm going to talk to them when I see them in person and be like, what did you guys do, like, within your community to really drive that, right? Because again, akin to what I've expressed through the webinar, right? We just learn from like what we try, right? So it's like I'll express to people, like I did with the guys at HQ, what I feel like might be helpful, or what would work, and ultimately we don't know how well something's going to land until a method is applied.
Yeah.
And so with these guys, it'd be like, you guys have sort of done really well to sell a lot of tickets early. And I want to try to mimic that, or at least sort of like understand their methods. Obviously it's down to the community as well, but ultimately everyone's got a community and the facilities I might be visiting. And it's like, what can I then sort of share with those people? Like, oh, these guys did this, it was really effective. Can we try this sort of strategy, right? Yeah. So I'll be back. I'll be back then. But no, the tickets for Dublin, to your question, so I had one fella who bought a ticket for Belfast. I only had one person. And so I messaged him and I said, listen, I'm going to have to can this event. I can give you a refund, or don't know what happened there. Can you hear me still?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know what happened to the screen.
The video has stopped for some.
Yeah. Don't know why. Things bugging out. Yeah, I said I can offer you a refund, or if you're willing to travel down to Dublin. And he was super keen to come to Dublin, so he's come to Dublin. So we've had, including him, there's 16 tickets plus the 3 from Dara yesterday. So 19 in total, plus yourself and whoever you wanted to come along.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that, Sean. We've got a few coaches there. I'd like to put it out to see who wants to show up. Do you have a limit on how many people I could bring in my gym?
Mate, you guys have gone above and beyond to be so incredibly helpful. One, like supporting me by just hosting me in the first place, which is I'm very appreciative of. And not asking for anything in return. Because that's typically how the things go with different facilities. It's all like, all right, cool, like put it on at with typically say a gym, and it's at a downtime, in terms of the gym not being too busy, and it might have a handful of trainers and be like, oh cool, you can get them to come along, because it doesn't cost me anything, but it's an added bonus to them, right? So there's reciprocity there. But yeah, you guys have gone above and beyond. Like this in itself, the lives that we've done, the emails and all that gets very much appreciated. Yeah, so the more the merrier. Like how many coaches do you have?
So we would have Mitch, Holly, Jay is my business partner. Sean is a business partner. Then we've got Lawrence, we've got Owen, and is that everybody? Yes, so there's 6.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
Solid.
Even if it was like 10, man, I honestly, like I said, you guys have gone above and beyond. Like you here on a Thursday evening, like fucking 10 p.m. On your end, and you're here having this chat with me. It's a reflection of, again, the values that we share. The fact that you give a shit. Yeah, it's very much appreciated. So yeah, it's the least I can do.
That's worth more than me to have my coaches, investing in them. They get to hear you because they like you as well. So that's just worth way more than me than trying to take a few quid of the ticket sales. I'm not interested.
Yeah.
Interestingly, like FRC, are you familiar with?
Yeah, I'm familiar. Yeah, somewhat familiar. Yeah.
He had we hosted him here 3 weeks ago, and there was fucking 6 people on the course.
Really?
Yeah. Now we had him here a few years back before COVID, albeit, and like 25, 30, and they came from fucking all over the place. But it's really weird. And the other thing about Dublin, which is just a bit funny at the minute, like a hotel room now in Dublin is above 350 quid a night.
Bro, it is insane. It is insane. I, fortunately enough, have a client of mine who I think I mentioned it to you. She lives by the water somewhere,
Right.
And she was kind enough to offer her place to myself and my girlfriend, who I'll be traveling with, and so she's going to stay with a friend of hers down the road and give us her place for the few days we're in, because I was planning to, because I've never been to Ireland before, right? And so the original plan was to arrive sort of earlier in the week prior to the seminar and sort of like, let myself adjust to the time zone somewhat, and then enjoy a few days in Dublin and whatnot, and then have the seminar on the weekend and then head off to London, right? Now, because Dublin was so unexpectedly expensive, I'm just like, fuck, this was really throwing a spanner in the works, right? I'm looking at $400 plus a night for like something very questionable. It was like, fuck, I don't want to stay out in the sticks, but even out in the sticks, like relative to Dublin, I'm like, I don't have transport, it's going to be a punish. And so she'd offered well in advance of this, and I was like, oh no, thank you. I thought she's being kind, right? And then she goes, she got a great crack, and she was like, yeah, you fucking laughed at me. You want that place now? And so I took her up on that offer because and we're flying into Paris instead, right? So we thought, like, funnily enough, it's have you been to Paris?
Yeah, a couple of times, yeah.
Yeah. So we're staying in Saint Germain, right? So quite a nice part of Paris, and so it was like on par to have a nice place in Paris per night than it was sort of average place in Dublin, which blew my mind. And so it's also the flight from, like, say, Sydney to Paris versus Sydney to Dublin was a lot easier, like cost and cost wise, right? Because like getting, say, because you have at least 2 flights, right, to somewhere halfway between, and it was, I can't remember what the difference was, but yeah, like flying into Dublin versus like flying into Paris or flying into London, so much more expensive, and then obviously the accommodation as well. I'm just like, oh, okay, so yeah, blows my mind.
But I bet you that's why, people from Galway, there's no fucking way they're coming down to Dublin for a seminar. Do you know what I mean? Like, because like you imagine somebody from the west, it's about a 4.5-hour drive either way. So you want to come down the night before, but then you look at the cost of a hotel and you're like, do you know what? Fuck that.
Now, how long is the train? Because the train tells me it's 2.5 hours. Is that about right?
From Galway to Dublin?
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's on time and all the rest, like.
Yeah.
But, my missus is turning off all the lights on me now to save electric. Thanks, brother. Yeah, I suppose train and all, but like, it's a pain in the hole. Most people want to be able to drive down or maybe stay down the night before and all. So maybe that's why.
Yeah. I know. The only reason why I'm asking is when I have the seminar in Galway, I have quite a logistical, logistically demanding weekend, because I fly into, this will be, and I haven't booked it just yet, but this is sort of the loose plan. Flying from Sydney into Edinburgh, landing on the Friday afternoon, 1 p.m. if it's on time, and then presenting in Edinburgh on Saturday, so the day after I land, and then from the gym in Edinburgh, fly to Dublin on the Saturday evening, stay in Dublin for the night, and then wake up in the morning, get a train to Galway on Sunday morning, presenting in Galway on the Sunday, stay in Galway the Sunday night, and then get a train back to Dublin on Monday morning to then fly out to Ibiza on Monday. So I told my missus, because she's coming with me, she's a trainer as well, and told her, like, this is the less glamorous part of what affords me, and by extension her, the ability to travel and do sort of like multiple trips in a year for multiple, and she's like, and she's so sweet. She goes, oh, if I have to, she's very appreciative of the situation, but I said, like, this is like the less glamorous side of just like transiting from here to there, and like what's the Amazing Race type, sort of like, I got to get to the airport, got to get to the got to get on the next one, and then bring yourself down and then present at the next location.
Holy shit! Yeah, I don't envy you doing that. Tell you. But yeah, no, the train would be the best way for you to go now. It's a bastard of a drive, like. It's just
Yeah. Well, just no. The only reason why I asked because I did look at the driving time, but yeah, the trains I looked up. The estimated time was 2.5 hours. And so I'm counting on that for when I can get the train to when I'm meant to land, arrive in Galway to then when I'm meant to start the seminar. So it'll just be like straight into it.
Shit.
Well, like talking this morning, right? It's water for ducks back, right? I wake up, said 2 words to my missus, wake up, and then into 2 hours of me chatting shit, right?
Awesome, man.
Mm.
Right, my man. Well, I think we've got good enough numbers here. I've still a couple of gyms I'm going to reach out to next week because we've still got a couple of weeks to go. There's a couple of friends of mine. There's Scott and Daryl's friends, and see if any of them are interested and see if we can get it up over the 25 mark. And
Yeah, mate, that'd be fantastic. I'd love to see that because obviously then with you guys in attendance will be over 30, and that'll be great. I love that. Yeah.
I'll see what I can do for you, Sean. I'll do my best.
Fantastic, mate. You already are, so it's very much appreciated.
Pleasure, mate. Thanks again for tonight.